Hello and welcome. My name is Helene Ambasa, Director of Legal Services at USIU-Africa. I shall be your host and moderator as we have a conversation on leading in uncertain times, governance, legal, and HR issues that organizations have to contend with. This webinar is the final one in a series of webinars that have been held over the past month with a view to ensuring that the campus community and our partners are appraised on topical, legal, and governance issues during these unprecedented times we are living in. To lead us in this conversation, I have with me Jacqueline Oyuyo Githinj and Raimond Molenje, both advocates of the High Court of Kenya and experts in governance, legal, and HR matters. I also have with me Salome Asena and Ernest Mwanzi, who will be assisting us throughout this session. I will start off by reading or pointing out to you some of Jackie's qualifications. Jackie is the managing partner at Umsizi LLP, a firm of advocates, arbitrators, mediators, and corporate secretaries. She has considerable experience in a broad range of commercial and family matters, gained in her close to 20 years legal and governance experience. She's committed to making organizations stick, demystifying corporate governance in a way that makes sense for each entity that she deals with, and she's adept at tackling regulatory compliance. In addition, she's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, a certified and court-accredited mediator, and holds an MBA in Global Technology Management. She also serves on various boards, including private sector, non-profit and state corporations in the capacity of non-executive director, and is a member of Women Corporate Directors Kenya chapter. Raimond Molenje, Head of Legal, HR and Industrial Relations at Kenya Bankers Association, has over 16 years experience in both legal and human resource practice, having worked as a practicing advocate, corporate in-house legal counsel at a government parastatal, and has held several legal, HR and labor relations roles. Prior to joining KBA, he was HR advisor at Delarue Currency and Security Print, Group HR Manager Employee Relations at Equity Bank, and Legal Manager at the Federation of Kenya Employers, FKE. Molenje is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, Commissioner for Oaths and Notary Public, and also lectures at the College of Human Resources Management. He is also a board member with the Auctioneers and Licensing Board and Mediation Accreditation Committee of the Judiciary. He is a practicing member with both the Law Society of Kenya and Institute of Human Resource Management. A few housekeeping rules. Please direct all your questions to the Q&A and not to the chat. That way we'll be able to ensure that we get to hear everything you have to say. We look forward to having a very interactive conversation, because this really is a conversation. We are living, as I said before, in unprecedented times, and it's important that we assess some of the issues that we are facing and will continue to face. So I will now hand over to Jacqueline Oyuyo Githinj to kick us off in this conversation. Jackie, over to you.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you for this opportunity to speak on matters governance, especially in such a critical moment for the world. Certainly unprecedented for a lot of us, as you have said. And the one thing I can say without fear of contradiction is that nobody is an expert in this crisis. I think we've seen a lot of stagnation in some areas. We've seen a lot of progress in some areas. So I look forward to the conversation we're going to have this afternoon, and maybe this morning for some people who are joining us from other jurisdictions. Mm-hmm. So firstly, allow me to give a very broad definition of governance, which will perhaps form a basis for our conversation today. Very simply put, governance is the manner in which an entity utilizes the resources that are available to it to enable it to achieve its strategic objectives or its strategy. These resources are varied and very diverse. They range from human capital to manufactured capital, which is the output of your processes, financial capital, your social capital, how you're impacting on the area around you, intellectual capital, which is all your knowledge management, what you have within you as an organization in terms of, especially for the creative industries, and then of course, natural capital, which is our natural resources. So corporate governance generally will require that an entity establishes structures. And the way in which it will do this is through policies, procedures, and then whittling down to practices and processes. So with that background in mind, and allow me to say that this corporate governance is not the preserve of the big corporates. It's just a term that is used. Corporate is a term that is used to cover even one-man shows, you know, the sole proprietorships, and also entrepreneurs in whatever shape and form. So with that in mind, what has governance looked like in this time of COVID-19? So in my experience and observation, I think I want to start by looking at governance at the public level, which is the national, in Kenya, the state and county level, and say that our national government certainly moved quite swiftly in response to the first official case of COVID-19 in middle of March 2020. So we saw a very quick and very decisive response from our government in terms of declarations that were made, directives that were issued, and we'll talk a lot more about them as this conversation progresses. And I think the balance is always between lives, i.e. health, and livelihoods, which is our sustenance and our ability to continue to generate income to sustain ourselves. And that's a conversation that I think is on every boardroom and in every conversation around governance in this country and across the globe. Now, interestingly, the word for crisis in the Chinese language is composed of two characters. One character which means danger, and another character which means opportunity. So for everybody, whether it is me at my individual firm level or a corporate entity, or even for Mama Mboga, it is acknowledging that we are in a danger zone right now with an unknown virus, but at the same time, where are the opportunities and how do we continue to take advantage of the previously existing opportunities? So this requires a holistic perspective. And in my view, what governance requires in a time of crisis is two things: the holistic perspective, firstly, and secondly, leadership. Now, when you talk about leadership, it also includes communication. How do you tailor your communication towards your audiences? So every so often in this republic, certainly on the 6th of June, everybody was very anxious to hear what the president had to say about the curfew and other measures that had been placed upon us. Now, unfortunately, we are not a very disciplined bunch of people here in Kenya, and our indiscipline is largely driven, I want to say, by our constant quest for survival and sustenance. So it is not just uninformed discipline. We really want to be disciplined, but we also want to survive. So the communication in terms of what we're hearing from our government, how we as then private sector entities are interpreting what we're hearing from the government and adapting it to our specific needs then becomes very critical, because nature hates a vacuum. So if nobody is communicating, we will find information even from incredible sources. And right now, our access to information is largely dependent on our access to technology. So if our president, for example, is not speaking, we are going to find out what, for example, the president next door is saying, the president over in the US is saying, and the guy in China, what he's saying as well. So even bringing that back to our conversation around governance, what your board chair, for example, is saying, what your university council is saying, becomes very important. And then how you interpret that information into practices that then safeguard both the organization and the individuals during the time of this crisis. In addition to that, I think one thing certainly in governance that has come front and center is risk management. I don't think I can underscore the need for risk management generally, but more so in the wake of the pandemic such as this. And what goes hand in hand with that risk management is then business continuity planning. Literally 10 days before our first, let me call it shutdown in quotes, I was in a boardroom with a client discussing a governance audit report and reminding them that they needed to test their business continuity plan. A business continuity plan is not a start and stop document. It is a cyclic document. It is a strategic document. So it's something you need to constantly be reminding yourself about and looking to in terms of what are the areas that we're likely to be impacted on, and how do we address that impact? How do we mitigate the effects of that impact? So that goes hand in hand with your overall risk management appetite and plan as an organization. In addition to that, we've had social and emotional intelligence, because it's not just about telling people don't come to work. It's also about asking them, can you work from home? And if you can, what tools do you need to enable you to work from home? As an organization, there are other considerations you need to have around data. You know, we have a Data Protection Act 2019 that is still coming alive and becoming a very pertinent conversation that organizations need to have. The other thing that was a big topical issue this quarter, especially, was the whole discussion around annual general meetings. How do you convene meetings? Can you convene meetings first and foremost? Are you empowered to convene meetings otherwise than is stated in your articles of association or other governing document, whether it's a trust document or a university charter or whatever it is? Are you empowered to hold meetings other than in a meeting room with people physically present? So that's another conversation that people have had. Also, the conversations around financial distress, your access to cash, your access to credit, your long-term investment, access to short and mid-term finances has been very topical. And of course, at a macroeconomic level, what is Kenya going to look like at the end of this year in terms of GDP? And how does that GDP then translate to us in our individual sectors of operation? And then finally, of course, sectoral considerations. I don't think there's any board that has not been affected, any council that has not been affected, any trust that has not been affected, any non-profit that has not been affected. So what are those existential issues that you have to discuss going forward in terms of a renewed focus and commitment to, for example, your client base? Certainly sectors such as real estate, banking, insurance, healthcare have been the most top of mind throughout this crisis. And how then have those been impacted, and how have they in turn impacted the rest of the economy? Helen, if you allow me, I will stop there because I've thrown a lot out there, and there will be a lot of opportunity to discuss further in the next couple of hours.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie. There's something you said that I thought I need to perhaps probe a little bit more. So when you talked about communication and how to tailor it to the various constituencies, it brought to mind the same issue about our own head of state and his communication and how it was tailored, and the whole confusion around cessation of movement and, so could you say something a little bit more about that? Because we have various levels within a society, and how I interpret might be different from how maybe my mama mboga will interpret, or my security officer will interpret. So how do we as leaders ensure that when we communicate, that message reaches the audience in the manner we intended it to? Yeah.
Okay, I think then the task would befall the leaders of any organization or the individuals who are tasked with responsibility for communication in any organization. So when, for example, a ban is placed on public gathering, what does that mean? What is a public gathering? We're not all lawyers and cannot rush to the regulations to start looking at the definition of public gathering, or indeed what a public space is. If we were to strictly follow the definition of public space, for example, given that I am currently sitting in my office, I should be wearing a mask in my office with my door closed, because an office is included in the definition of public space. So what does that mean then for an organization? You have to interpret it and break it down to a level that even the lowest person in your organization can understand. So you will then say, this is what the government requires of us. We require you not to move around outside your home between currently the hours of 9 p.m. and 4 a.m. We require you when you're in a matatu to wear a mask. We require you when you're walking from the matatu to your office or to your home to wear a mask, and anywhere else. And even the wearing of that mask is defined. It must cover your mouth and your nose. Kenyans, please remember that. Your mouth and your nose. Okay, this is not just Kenyans. This is a global problem where masks are worn as chin guards and scarves and head scarves. But the mask really, there's a way in which it's supposed to cover your mouth also. And most often what makes your communication most effective is giving the reasons for that communication. So if you're wearing a mask, what is the purpose for wearing that mask? It is to prevent you infecting others and others from infecting you. Now, when you understand that, then you will immediately start to realize that I need to cover certain parts of my face so that I am not infecting others in the event that I'm in that population that is asymptomatic. I'm not infecting others unwittingly and others are not infecting me. So you have to break down the communication, even as you receive it at a national level, you have to break it down within your organization so that it is very readily and easily understood and assimilated in the organization. Thank you.
Now, something else you said that I thought would help us now to easily segue into the HR and legal issues is, about whether one can work from home. What tools do you need to work from home? There are no questions coming in yet, but I was wondering whether both you and Raimond could delve further into this issue of working from home and what the obligations of the leadership are towards their employees and vice versa.
Okay. And I know Raimond will go into this in a lot more detail because it impacts also on issues to do with leave and all that. But when we say work from home, essentially we mean for certain hours of the day, you will be performing your duties as if you are performing them whilst you are in the office. Now, to enable you to do that, you will need access in certain ways. You may need certain gadgets to empower you, and what were previously considered executive perks, things like a laptop, and when I wish, things like access to Wi-Fi, even something simple like having a phone with airtime. We shouldn't take it for granted that when people are at home and they have a mobile, that they then have airtime to continue working as if they were in the office. So some of these things are obviously contingent on the financial resources that are available to the entity. So can you afford to give every employee a laptop? Is that something you can afford or not? If not, then what's the workaround? What are those duties that they can perform outside of the workplace that they can continue to perform without necessarily having the gadget? If you give them the gadget, what are the rules around confidentiality of client information, for example? What are the rules around safeguarding that asset? It is still a company asset or a firm asset. How do you continue to make sure that it is treated with that in mind? How do you ensure that it is returned in the same state or marginally the same state in which it was issued? Should you, for example, have non-disclosure agreements, if you don't already have them, where your employees know very clearly that they cannot disclose information that comes to them within the context of their employment? So it is really a practical question in terms of what you can give to your staff to enable them to continue to work. And we saw this with a lot of legal practitioners, certainly, where they were simply not able to provide access to their associates and lower cadres of staff to enable them to continue to work. So working from home became an impossibility. So what happens then in that situation? And I'm sure Raimond will delve further into this. But for me, it is really a practical issue, and it is really contingent on what resources are available to the entity.
Thank you. Raimond, we now move over to you to lead us in a conversation about the HR and legal issues that we are supposed to pay attention to in these uncertain times that we are living in. Okay. Raimond?
Thank you so much, Helen. And it's a pleasure to actually join you and have this conversation. And just to pick it up, we just need to have a background as to the time or even the day that we are living in, because as as of yesterday, we got very frightening statistics because the number for positive tests were actually at the very highest yesterday. That was 3 or 7, which is a pointer to the fact that even as we wait for 6th, the situation is actually getting worse by the day. So we are in 6,000 and plus for the positive cases. Although actually that number, the reality is that the numbers might be quite high because, we've not done mass testing. We've actually been doing target testing, and then also now just doing the tracing of those we can be able to find positive. So it's a key issue to be able to just know that we are in a day that it's much more worse than March, April, when we were closing up and just ensuring that, yes, the work from home arrangement was quite on point. Because from May, June, people started to relax. We started coming back to work after knowing that, yes, it's a long-term journey. And it's a situation which is actually going to take us in phases. So when the pandemic began, we got to hear the new words like flatten the curve. So we are not even anywhere closer to flattening that curve, because from the information from the Minister of Health is that the peak may actually be in July or August. So it's after the peak, that's now when the curve ought to flatten, and then now we start seeing the numbers going down. So relating it again to what the President said, His Excellency the President said in the last address, in that we'll open up when we are sure that the numbers are going down. We'll open up when we know the capacity within our hospitals are actually adequate, mostly for the counties. But the information we're actually getting currently is numbers are going up. Counties, as of yesterday, we're only being told that less than 20 had actually complied with the requirement of having 300 beds, at least for isolation, for the isolation units. So we're in a situation where we need to be extra cautious. So that's where now we come in, as we look at it from a leadership angle, both from an individual person and then corporate, and then now as a member of the general public. So at a personal level, there are also 2 angles in that there's the aspect of survival, because as we are all in this discussion, you don't know whether you're positive, whether you're negative, unless you are tested yesterday. And then now the other thing that you also don't know is, are you going to survive? Because I might be part of the statistics come 2021, in that, yes, there were 1,000 people who lost their lives in Kenya as a result of COVID. So the question is, will you be part of the 1,000 statistics if we get to that number? So it's a key issue that we also need to look at, in that there's an element of survival. In that, as we have this conversation, it's not just an issue of it's happening to some section of the community or some section of the public, and it's not closer to where I am. So that's a key consideration, in that as we walk through this journey, which is very novel again, because the other aspect is, even if you tested positive, you've been treated, you are well at the moment, it's a novel virus, which you don't know whether come next month, you can still be reinfected, and it may actually be worse than the previous situation that you went through. So our survival is key at an individual level. That's why it's key for leaders to actually be able to demonstrate the leadership and lead by example, because there's actually been a trend of, we see leaders preaching for all of us to be able to follow the Minister of Health guidelines. But the same leaders, again, we find out that they're not living up to those expectations. So as we join this conversation and as we have this discussion at your own level, we are all leaders. So please ensure that, yes, you preach what you actually, the values that you are living. Because so many people are watching, and when you start shaking hands, when you start hugging, so kids will know, hey, coronavirus is done, so we can actually also be able to play and mingle the way we used to do. So it's very, very key for us to look at that. Then the other component is at a corporate level. Now you have your workers who all along we have been used to working together seeing each other every day, working our 8 to 5, but things changed very drastic and you are not prepared. So it's actually been a period where it's been trial and error for this work from home, because it's an arrangement where for the last 5, 3, 2 or 1 year, there's been a lot of digitization where we are saying we're in the fourth revolution. But at a company level, there are very few companies which had actually embraced the digital revolution and even embraced the work from home arrangement. And even the work from home arrangement was just like a trial and error. People are doing it like you may work one day from home, or when you have a personal issue, that's when you will be allowed to work from home. But there weren't policies, procedures in place to be able to ensure that, yes, we have a structured way in which actually you can be able to work from home, and also as leaders map out work that can actually be 100% done from home. So as we move along in this particular journey, which is actually going to take phases and it will be long. So what we need to do is, as leaders, be able to map out in organizations, be able to ensure that, yes, we map out work which can be fully be done by our team members from home, and ensure that that work is actually being done from home. Even if the president opens up on 6th or whatever period that opening is happening, if you mapped out that work that can be done from home, it will go a long way in actually containing the spread, because the spread will continue, and the phase in which we are in, we need not necessarily depend on government, but also be able to express the leadership at our own level. So work that can be done from home ought actually to continue until either we get a vaccine or until a time when all of us have been exposed and we feel, and we've also been actually alerted by the Minister of Health that, yes, we've been able to confirm if you've been exposed and then now you can't be able to be reinfected, or even if there's a second wave, it won't be as severe as it will have been if you are actually being exposed for the first time. So that's very, very key. The other component is that this virus has come with added costs to businesses. So work from home arrangement can actually in a way also be able to manage your costs, because there's an aspect of all our revenues are down, so we need to manage costs. So there's an aspect of social distance. And the last check from the Ministry of Labor, that is the Occupational Safety and Health Department, they issued the guidelines, that is 2 days ago, on 29th of June, where they're saying in each and every workplace, you need to maintain social distance between workstations of 2 meters. So it's not 1 or 1.5 meters, but 2 meters. And it's a guideline, so it's actually law because it's coming from government. So we need to ensure that, yes, we are complying with that. And part of you complying to that is to ensure that, yes, some of your team members are actually working from home, because in most of our workstations, it's extremely difficult to be able to maintain the numbers that we had and then now be able to do the 2 meter distance on either side. It's not 2 meters left or right, but it's 2 meters on either side. Yeah, that's a guideline that actually you ought to look for it, because it's actually titled Return to Work guideline by the Minister of Labor under the Department of Health. So it's quite key that that arrangement needs to be put in place, and also that aspect of just ensuring that, yes, our workers are aware of when you are exposed or your colleague actually gets to test positive, what are the measures that are supposed to be done? Because those are the measures which will still be able to help us to be able to stop the spread, because it may be a suspected case. So the issue is it won't be business as usual. So we need to stop work, be able to ensure that, yes, is it positive or is it just an issue of suspected, so that we can be able to go for self-quarantine for the 14 days to be able to confirm, yes, what's the status and the necessary checks. So that's key. However, for a situation where it's a positive case and somebody was at work, that one again, the other protocols come in that, yes, you need to stop work, be able to sanitize the place, identify all the people who have been able to engage with that particular colleague, to go for self-quarantine as well as test. So it's a cost to businesses. And my advice is, as because from the banking world, what we've done is we've been able to implement 2 teams in each and every department. So there's a team which will be at work, and there's another team either is on leave or they're working from a different site, so that in the event that there's either a suspected case or a positive case in a particular station, so when we stop work, it doesn't mean that now we'll stop work for the 14 days. What happens is, yes, we stop the work, the people who are affected are isolated. However, now we bring in team B, which has not had any interaction with this team A, which has actually been affected. So that's how actually banks are managing. And for banks, I know you've seen it in public, because actually there have been situations where banks have been reporting their branches temporarily closed, because we closed for between 2 and 3 days to just be able to fumigate, sanitize the whole place before now the team B comes in for situations where there's a positive case which has been reported. So it's been working well, and that's something that I'll advise, that as business leaders, we work around to be able to ensure that even if you are 2 in a department, you can actually have that team A and team B, so that at any given time, there's only be 1 person in the office to either work for 1 or 2 weeks. The other one is actually still working, but working from home. Then now you interchange. The other person goes to work from home. The other one comes to work physically in the office. That will actually be able to ensure that in case there's something reported at the office, it's only affecting 1 person from the 2-member department or the 2-member team. So the other person can actually be able now to come after the 2 or 3 days when the office has been sanitized, and business will be able to progress. Otherwise, if we don't do that, and as I've indicated, the 3 or 7 of yesterday, we are being told the peak is coming in July or this month or next month. What will happen is it's now coming closer home. You'll find that either in your building, in your work, in your department, there's someone who has either had contact with a positive person, or the person is positive, or you yourself, you are positive. And now when that happens, these protocols come in. We've been hearing as if it's somewhere.
Yeah, it's far removed from us.
Yes, but now with these numbers of 3 or 7, it's coming very close to us. So we just need to put in measures to ensure that, yes, our work continues, because there are 2 angles. You survive as a person, and you survive as an organization, as a business. So that team A, team B will ensure you to survive as a business. Otherwise, there are some of our businesses, when there's a reported case, and then now we have to be away for the 14 days, or even for the positive cases, people are taking 1 month, others even more than 1 month for them to fully heal and be able to come back. Some of our businesses, when we come back after the 1 month, after the 21 days, you may not find the business there. And you know how things are evolving and how things are moving fast. So it's very key that we work out arrangements, just ensuring that, yes, people matter, people are key in all these situations. And also, as we put on policies, measures to be able to look in this environment, we just ensure that, yes, we are as humane as possible. And as Helene indicated, the communication is key, how you communicate. And as leaders, don't really delegate a lot. So when it comes to communication and communicating key issues, please be on the forefront. However bad the news might be, but check up. Actually, that's what leadership calls you to be able to do, so that you don't delegate everything and you only communicate good news. So when it comes to bad news or scary news, you now have to delegate to somebody else. It's key that, yes, leaders, we are central and we get in touch with our people and then now be able to communicate. So I may relax there, look whether there's a question, and then now we can be able to come in so that it doesn't become so monotonous. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Raimond. Actually, your segment and Jackie's final segment just before you came in,
yep,
seemed to have been in sync with what some of the participants are actually thinking about and expressing. So we have a couple of questions, and most of them are really touching on return to work.
Okay.
So the question is, assuming an imminent reopening, I don't know why we are all assuming that on the 6th of July, His Excellency is going to say we are going back to
yes
work or reopening the economy. Again, an issue of communication that it's as if we think every time he addresses us, he's going to say, we are going back, or now I'm reopening the economy fully. So assuming an imminent reopening,
yes,
is it possible for either one of you to touch on what an employer's and employee's obligations would be in a return to work? You alluded to it in terms of the guidelines of social distancing, but what more should we expect? Forced tests? And do we call them forced tests? Because can I object the way I'm seeing some people in the US objecting to wearing masks? Can I object to taking a COVID test because it's illegal, it's an infringement of my rights?
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Helen. I may actually be able to begin, then I know Jackie will also be able to come in. So just on point as to some of the considerations that we need to put in place as we reopen, and reopening can be two ways. Either the government makes the announcement that yes, it's opening up, which may be people moving in and out of Nairobi, in and out of Mombasa, and also for some other areas like pubs have been closed. Some people are really, really eager to have the pubs open. And then now flights have been grounded for some time. So people are really looking for that also to be lifted. So that's the one angle of opening. The other opening is, yes, we've been in Nairobi here and you've been working from home, but you feel your staff needs to come back, despite the fact that the government has not said as such here. So it may be looked at it in two ways. Because many organizations actually have opened up, people are back to work because you are all in Nairobi. So the key thing is just to ensure that there are guidelines issued by the Ministry of Health that needs to be adhered to 100%. So one of it is the simple issues of being able to provide face masks while staff are within the working areas. And that's, it's not an obligation by the staff, it's an obligation by the employer to be able to make that provision. Then water.
To provide the masks.
Yes.
So we are clear, we must provide masks.
Yes. You need to provide masks. You need to provide sanitizers. So it's not an issue of staff coming with their own sanitizers, but at work, it's actually a requirement by the employer to be able to ensure that, yes, masks, sanitizers are provided. Social spacing at the workplace, you need to make that arrangement to ensure that, yes, even as people come, the war is not won. Actually, it's at its peak. So social spacing is key. And this is just to control the infection. There is the aspect of meetings. Do we need to go back to our normal departmental meetings, our normal group company meetings? No, we have been doing so well on our various virtual platforms. So as much as possible, we avoid congregations meeting, even when people are back together. That's key. And then the other aspect that we need to look at is our customers. When we've looked internally and we finished, then now we look outside our customers. I've seen many buildings now, which is actually a requirement that you need to take the temperature before people come in to just be able to assess, hey, you are not on the red alert for you to be able to be admitted in. And also part of us who have lifts, you ensure that, yes, you are managing. So at least people don't crowd in those lifts. And then also just to be able to alert customers, because there are places where customers will come either line up or sit at your reception. So have you also made that arrangement that, yes, as they come in, there's social spacing, which is being observed. So that's very, very key. And then there are regulations which have actually come in as a result of COVID that we need to be alive to, in that with the curfews and all that, there are so many regulations that were put in place. So some are obvious, we've been aware of, but others actually not so obvious. Something that you mentioned on the tests. Workspace is, there's a requirement under the OSHA Act, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, for actually an employer to be able to do tests, even when you are getting employed. You know, when you are getting employed, employers actually do pre-employment tests. It's actually a requirement by law. So now with this pandemic also, and the guideline that I indicated that was issued on 29th of June, the Minister of Labor and Occupational Health and Safety Department, they have said, yes, you need to put in measures where your workers actually need to undergo the tests. So if an employer feels and is comfortable that, yes, they need to do the tests, that one is actually provided for. So you'll not be violating anything. And any worker who is resisting, then there are mechanisms which actually can be able to be taken, because it's a guideline by government. It's not just a requirement by one employer who feels I need to make my space more secure. So you're actually backed by law to be able to request employees to be able to do that. But if somebody is refusing, again, it's an issue of respectfully being able to take the person through why. It's for their own safety, for their own health, and also now for the health of everybody around them. So it's not an issue of, and also the other key aspect is an issue of discrimination, which has also been addressed in those regulations, in that we don't discriminate people who either have been through the treatment or are in isolation or are coming back and they were positive. So it's key that as leaders, we need to be in the forefront to ensure that there is no discrimination, because it has consequences. As an employer, if it's reported, because a mechanism has actually been provided for employees to be able to report to the Ministry for Labor on situations where people are being discriminated, because there may be environments where, like I know, I'll take another example in that we are all employers because we employ house girls. Now, your house girl was positive. So I know majority of us will have difficulties in having the worker come back just because they were positive some 1 month ago, some 2 weeks ago. So that also may happen at the workplace. There are some employers who may feel, hey, there are some of our people here who have been positive. So when they come back, they are bringing the virus to our stations. So you may find out that either when you are doing restructuring or we are extending the unpaid leave is being extended to those people who are positive or those people who are in isolation. But everybody else who was not mentioned, they are coming back. So that will be a direct discrimination, and actually it can be taken up, and there may be serious consequences if you actually get into that mess of making decisions which are geared towards isolating those who either have had contact or actually have been positive. And then the other key thing that needs just to be put in place is travel arrangements as to how we travel, work issues. So do we need to keep traveling the way we've been traveling? Do we need to do all our meetings in Mombasa, Kisumu, Naivasha, the way we've been doing? So we may need to still slow it down, be able to do our virtual meetings, even if it's been reopened. And this needs to be put in policy so that it's again not discriminative, because some employees will come to you and say, hey, there's a team which went to Mombasa last week. Why are you now telling me I can't go to Kisumu and you're saying it's COVID? So it needs to be documented. So at least there's an issue of balance in that employees are aware and the communication is clear that going forward, you'll only travel if it's absolutely necessary and for 1, 2, 3 measures. Because this will, again, just help us in that people don't travel, mingle around, and then when they come back to an office, they still endanger all of us, as indicated here. Thank you. Jackie.
Thank you, Raimond. Jackie?
Yeah, I just want to add on to what Raimond has said. And I like what he has said about documenting your reasons for either following the law or making exceptions to certain policies you currently have in place. And this is largely for the HR professionals, because discrimination is largely prohibited in our constitution and in subsequent legislation. There's a lot of concern around back to work formulas, back to work policies. And these will largely derive from the national policies and the state directives that are given, and the acts that then ensue, largely the Public Health Act, the Health Act, and the Public Order Act. So we will have to keep abreast of what amendments are made to those underlying pieces of legislation. But the other thing that I do want to add is around insurance. So if a member of your staff tests positive and you have a medical insurance policy, but that medical insurance policy largely excludes pandemics, then what arrangements have you made as an organization to cater for that member of staff? Are you going to cater for that staff? And this is where your emotional intelligence and social intelligence will kick in. It may not be documented anywhere in your policy, but you will have to make decisions around how you are going to treat that case. And also, piggybacking on what Raimond said about testing, the testing is also to protect other staff. So I've seen a question from the participants around, can you be held accountable for employees who catch the disease in the course of employment? The short answer, I would argue, is yes. Because you as an employer are charged with enabling a safe working environment, which is another argument you will give to that member of staff who is telling you they don't want to be tested. Because it then becomes a question of, as I said earlier, lives versus livelihoods. Do you want to work? And do you want to work in a safe environment? And do you want to live? Those are the three very basic questions that we have to ask ourselves, even as employees. Excuse me. So yes, there are responsibilities that fall on the employer, but also on the employee. I don't really want to get into the insurance question, only to say that it is now time, if you haven't already started talking to your insurance underwriters, to start having that bare knuckles conversation around what will happen. And a lot of it will be contingent on your individual, it's a case-by-case basis. I don't see the insurance industry making any blanket directives around this, but I do see them looking at your case and saying, okay, in the case of USIU's medical scheme, we see that you have largely been performing okay. You don't have any fraudulent claims in the past. You don't have, too many claims. Your liquidity of your personal, your medical insurance scheme is fairly okay, to the extent that we will consider making exceptions to the pandemic restriction in your insurance policy. But you have to start that conversation sooner rather than later. And that conversation, I would dare say, should not even be maybe for a corporate, but I don't think it should be through your broker or an agent. You need to be talking to the decision makers in these insurance companies, because as Raimond has said, the time is coming when, among the four of us who are currently on this screen, one of us will be COVID.
God forbid.
But you see, in terms of the numbers, this is where we're headed.
Yes.
In terms of the numbers, certainly between August and September, this is where we're headed. You saw yesterday the Ministry of Education backtracking on a statement it made 2 weeks ago that schools will reopen in September.
Yeah.
What the cabinet secretary said is, excuse me, I don't think we're going to open in September. I think we're likely to open in January, which I'm sure for a lot of parents is a logistical nightmare. I've seen another question in the panel about what do you do as an employer? Because even your employees, as they work from home, are balancing having to, facilitate their children's education.
Yes.
In addition to their work. So how are they balancing those interests? And this is where, again, social intelligence comes in. If you see that a productivity of a member of staff has gone down, you need to be asking yourself, what could have happened? Is it just a question of their being lazy, or their being taking advantage of a situation, or do they really have a constricted situation that prevents them from effectively delivering on their duties? So unfortunately, as leaders, and that's why I said a lot of where I started off, leadership is important in a crisis. You need to be asking yourself these questions. And first, let me just say, I commend every single parent who has had to balance work and education in this season. It is not easy, and it is to be commended. So going forward, what will that look like? If we are in this situation until December, as Margot has said yesterday, what are we going to do? And how are we going to facilitate our children and at the same time facilitate our employer and by extension deliver on both ends? So just in addition to what Raimond has said, the issue of insurance, very important, and also the issue of looking at case-by-case basis for renegotiating insurance contracts?
Yeah, I want to take us deeper into that insurance issue.
Yeah.
When the pandemic, when COVID basically was declared a pandemic,
Yes.
there was all this hullabaloo about, oh, insurance is not going to cover a pandemic, but the IRA issued some statement, which to an extent actually was saying that, yes, that underwriters would take on that risk. Then at some point, I think, was it late last month or mid last month?
Yeah.
There was a hue and cry again, this time from private hospitals, I believe. There was a certain private hospital engaged, according to the media, because these are stories you read in the media, in some back and forth with an insurance company about honoring claims related to COVID-19. Word was that going forward, yes, we will cover COVID-19, but only if you get treated in a public hospital. Okay? So I like the fact that you said we need to start having conversations, and you put it to the HR practitioners within our institutions to begin having those conversations with insurance companies directly. And as they're having those conversations, also to be able to educate the employees within the organization that this is what will happen if you contract COVID-19. You will not be able to go to Nairobi Hospital. You will not be able to go to Aga Khan. You will have to go to a public hospital. All the more reason why you need to take care of yourself, stay safe, and observe the guidelines that have been put in place.
Yep.
So Jackie answered that question about balancing being an employee and being a homeschooling parent. There is a question here about how an employer balances their obligations if they have a workforce that is spread between working from home and office arrangements. And Raimond, you said something very interesting, almost as if it's like a cabinet and a shadow cabinet. I must have I must have backup, even in terms of human resource. I found that very interesting, how that is working in the banking sector. I'm wondering how that would work within a university setting, teaching staff, because I'm a lecturer in psychology.
Yes.
I cannot have a lecturer in accounting come to teach psychology. So in as much as we are talking about the pandemic having brought in a situation of reduced costs, I see again an issue of increased costs if I now have to think about backup staff. Would you like to say something about that?
Yes, thank you, Helen. Actually, it's a very interesting angle to look at those team A and team B. From now, that angle of now, this is a lecturer, and you can now be able to plug somebody from mathematics to be able to do psychology. So the key will still be leadership. You can still achieve the same, but in a different way. In that, what you will do is not all lecturers will be required actually to come physically at the workplace. So what you'll do, it will be a blend. So you do rotation. In that, in a month, so you'll require that both the mathematics lecturer and the psychologist lecturer are only on site 2 weeks. Then the other 2 weeks, they teach their classes online. So what will happen is that, yes, you can have that situation. So anything coming in, it doesn't actually affect now your entire faculty. Because now the problem is if all of them are coming daily, so if one tests positive, it means the first step is, can we isolate, go test? So it means actually there's no work for like 1 week because people are isolated, they are testing. And even when you test negative and actually you've had contact, it doesn't mean actually you are negative, because after 2 weeks, you may actually turn out to be positive. So the bit is just leadership to be able to look at how to work around it with either shifts, even for people working in factories, because you may not be able to manage to have that team A and team B, but you can now be able to work in shifts. And the other thing that you'll realize is that, yes, we are fighting survival. It's an issue of life and then also survival for the business. So we'll be able to incur costs and also be able to forgo some revenue. Is that our productivity, our working hours will have to be adjusted to be able to fit into the shift. In that you'll have one shift coming in, and these two shifts, it's not like the normal way where one is leaving and the other one is coming in, so they interact with a story. No, you have to ensure that, yes, one finishes, they go, there's no interaction with now the other shifts, which is, so if one shift is finishing at 3 and the others are coming in to do work extended hours or in the night, you ensure that those teams don't meet, so that in case there is something being picked up from any of the shifts, you know the people you are targeting to isolate first, then the others can be able to run your show. So it's all about how you rework around to be able to see, yes, if a case, because what you need to do is play scenarios. If there's a positive case today at your desk, how many people are affected? How many people will you point out and say, hey, you need to go for isolation here? So now that will point out to you as now, how do you work backwards to be able to ensure that, yes, you actually create that scenario of either team A or team B. So that can be worked out in either blend of virtual plus physical, or just actual physical, but working in shifts.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. There's a question here about whether, in light of the concessions and adjustments that Jackie talked about, working hours, telecommuting. So the question is whether employees can enforce these new terms upon a return to work, like they can insist to work from home rather than return to the office. And then Raimond, I think both of you, Raimond and Jackie, both of you can take this other question about a client who is wondering how to undertake dismissal measures during COVID-19 in respect of employees who are not tech savvy, yet the current restrictions don't allow for face-to-face procedures.
Okay, in response to the first question around the responsibilities post-COVID, so to speak, what we're essentially discussing is a renegotiation of a contract. Because certainly all the employment contracts I have ever signed require me to work from the office within working hours, and those working hours are defined. If we are now saying that we want to work exclusively from home, then that is a renegotiation of a material term of your contract, and it requires parties to sit down and negotiate. And for a negotiation, there has to be a justification. So your employee cannot now say that because I work from home during COVID, I'm going to work from home after COVID. First and foremost, COVID is here to stay until we have a vaccine. So what is that post-COVID season that will now become a work from home season? So we need to be very practical around even renegotiation of contracts, whether it's employment contracts, whether it's contracts with your landlord, whether it's contracts with your service, along your whole supply chain. Who are these people who are you engaging with in a commercial sense? And how do you each continue to meet your respective obligations towards each other? And these conversations must happen in a very mature and robust way so that both parties have a win-win. So it's not so much of arm twisting of either party by the other. It is really a serious renegotiation of contract terms. As to the second question, sorry, please remind me what the second question was.
It was about an employer whether they now have an opportunity to dismiss employees who are not tech savvy.
Okay, and again, the basis of dismissal is that they can't work from home.
Yes.
In a situation where
there is no face-to-face,
they have no control. This is what in law we call frustration of contract, which means you are unable to deliver on your contract because of an unforeseen and unintended event that was not there at the time when you entered into the contract. So one of the buzzwords, Helen, I'm sure you've seen in the last 3 months is force majeure, which has become in Kenya what amicus curiae was during the election.
Yes.
So suddenly everybody knows and is an expert on force majeure. So firstly, not every contract has a force majeure clause. But for the contracts that do, force majeure is clearly defined. It will either be civil strikes, commotion, basically things that are outside of our control, and neither one or both of us will not be able to fulfill the terms of the contract. Now, where you don't have a force majeure clause, then the common law principles of impossibility and frustration will apply. And force majeure and impossibility and frustration will apply in somewhat similar ways, in the sense that the courts don't apply them strictly. There has to be proof. So you have to prove that I cannot, well, first of all, it was an unforeseen event that was outside of our control, both parties, or the party that is seeking to rely on it. And secondly, that because of that event, I cannot deliver, and therefore I need to be excused from continuing to perform my obligations under the contract. So if as an employer, you are now telling your employee, you need to go because you're not tech savvy. Did you know he was not tech savvy at the time you employed him? So think through some of these things before you start to apply them, and ask yourself whether in a court of law, for example, you would be able to uphold that decision. And even before we go to the courts, if you were talking to a labor union, for example, if that employee is unionized, would that be a justifiable reason for terminating that employee? And I know we're going to get into the very hot area of redundancies and pay cuts shortly, but let me pause there and maybe allow Raimond to make some comments as well.
Raimond, would you like to add on to Jackie's comments on this issue of dismissal in light of the fact that they are not tech savvy, or should we move to the next question?
Yes, actually, Jackie has clearly explained it very well, put it clearly and plainly, the way I wanted employers to be able to hear it out. Just to add that of key consideration is COVID or no COVID, the law is still the same. Unfortunately, that law has not been amended, because the employment law and the constitution around labor issues, everything is still intact. So in whatever form, in whatever shape you may wish to disengage with the staff during this particular period, the current law has to be complied with. So whether it's, because like the scenario that we painted out in that, yes, this worker cannot be able to continue performing the work because they don't have the capability to be able to work from home. So it means you have to look for, are you declaring the person redundant because he doesn't have a particular skill to be able to perform the work that is there at the moment? So when you pick that route of redundancy, there's a process which now needs to be followed. So COVID will not come in to be able to give you short circuit on you do it without following the process. Same to even any other termination, there is misconduct performance. Still the process has to be followed, including the disciplinary hearing. However, the law doesn't necessarily say you have to do a physical disciplinary hearing. It says a disciplinary hearing. So you can still do a virtual disciplinary hearing, just the same way courts have evolved. We never knew that you will actually be able to do a virtual court hearing and then I'll be able to get a virtual judgment. I don't know whether we can be able to execute virtually. It's I'm in the auctioneer's board, so we are exploring that, whether we can be able to execute virtually. But now things have really moved. So currently, even I know a number of companies, they're actually doing virtual disciplinary hearing. But of caution is you need now to be able to check your care and consideration for the staff to another higher level than you'll even have done on a one-to-one. So you must ensure that, yes, the environment is okay on both ends for you to be able to have the session. You must also ensure that there's, in the law, there's the requirement for witness. So you need to make provision for that, yes, a witness will be allowed. So the witness can be either physically with the staff where the staff is, or the witness can also be able to join in through a link and be able to follow the proceedings and also contribute in the discussions. So the law is still there, because when you go to court, the court will not be able to rule in your favor when you say it was COVID. So we only exchanged show cause letters, the response, and then I took the decision. You'll be asked, where's the hearing? So you need to ensure that all that process is followed through before now you take the action, which hearing can be physical or virtual, but still with the concurrence of the staff, because some staff may insist on physical meeting. You need to convince them as to why you have to do it virtually, which may be still for their own safety and sake. Now, just to add before we move on, there's a question which was asked on performance, still on work from home. Mm-hmm. What I will say is before COVID, there's been this aspect of digital revolution. So what we are looking at as HR practitioners was an aspect of work not being just a place that you go and stay 8 to 5, but work is just a space. You have a space to be able to deliver some actions, which space you can be able to do it from anywhere. You can be in Germany and I'm assigning you as my supervisor in Kenya. What I need is a product, and then I can be able to deliver the results. So you'll have done the work. So that's the conversation that we were having, to be able to transform our workspaces in that you can be able to do work from anywhere and have the flexibility. I can work for 5, 10 companies at a go. I don't have to necessarily be on a desk 8 to 5 and also be restricted to one employer. So key for this work from home arrangement is just to ensure that you rework your deliverables, you rework your targets with your team, the ones which are working from home, in that you're very clear on what is supposed to be delivered. Because it's not an issue of now seeing somebody, because in the workplace, you may have no deliverables, but you've seen the person busy around. So you assume, yes, the person has actually been working. But when it comes to work from home, it's now an issue of the deliverables. We agree on the deliverables, either the quality or the quantity or the time within which they're supposed to be delivered. Have they been delivered? Then now we can be able to appraise the staff and be able to move on. So that's what I'll say. It's still possible, and in fact, even much more clearer than when, there are some points, some of us in the office, but at some point you ask yourself, 8 to 5, what have I done? You have you start struggling as to what you've been able to achieve 8 to 5. But now work from home, you'll not be looking at the time, but it's just the deliverables. We agreed on this. Whether the person did that work in 2 hours or 3 hours and then they went doing their own things, whether the person did it when they were shopping or in or beside the swimming pool, it's not your business. So you just have the targets and let them be achieved within the timelines. So it's much possible. And even some of us, what we've seen is there's been actually more production, or staff have been more productive actually working from home as to when some of them actually around, because of the many distractions and many other divergent issues that come about. So it may be a good thing in that, yes, you may even, when you're assessing it well, you may realize that actually there's more production coming in from staff when they are working away than when they are within the buildings.
Thank you. I have a question here, and as I ask that question, I think I'll also take up Stephen Kamau's question. Working from home arrangement, according to all of us now that we know, I know there are some organizations that had already implemented, flexi time. And flexi time aspect of it included working from home. So it's a fairly new concept. The question here is whether it should be anchored in law in view of the urgent requirement to declutter or decongest and maintain social distancing at the workplace. And then the issue of force majeure. Most of these employment contracts are, like copy and paste, It's like what we used to do in 1970, 80, 90. So there's no new thinking around how to prepare employment contracts. Should we be including force majeure in employment contracts? Because I know in commercial contracts, we do have a lot of force majeure clauses, but employment contracts, are just basic. So is it advisable to include, in light of, like I said at the very beginning, the unprecedented times we are living in, going forward, is it prudent that we now consider including force majeure clause in our contracts? Thank you.
Okay, so for the first question in terms of working from home and whether it should be embedded in the law, I think it may become an inevitability for the simple reason that in most return to work policies, an employer will be required to make sure that employees are safely distanced away from each other. Mm-hmm. So the 1.5 meter minimum, and to the extent that is possible and necessary, physical barriers in between workstations. So there may be some amendments to the occupational, I don't want to preempt it, but there may certainly be some amendments to the Occupational Health and Safety Act to the extent that it can then incorporate work from home initiatives, because they will become necessary. For example, if you have over 100 employees, how do you physically distance them 1.5 meters apart in the space you already have and the space you have already leased? I don't see anybody entering into new leasing arrangements simply to facilitate working from home and physical distance space. So it may need to be embedded into the law to make it a little easier for employers to enforce the safety measures that will inevitably be introduced through legislation. As regards force majeure, I think there are two clauses that any employment contract going forward needs to consider. Now, force majeure, yes, but just so you know, even if you don't have it, you can still rely on the common law principles of frustration and impossibility. So even if you don't have it, you can still rely on those principles. However, it is something you should consider going forward in your employment contracts. The other thing you should consider in your employment contracts is a dispute resolution clause, because the Employment Act enables conciliation, for example. But where do most employment disputes end up? In the court. In the labor courts. Exactly. And then they drag on to whoever's benefit, maybe us lawyers, I don't know, but they drag on inevitably. And meanwhile, somebody is suffering, either the employee who was dismissed or whatever the action is, or the employer who then has to facilitate these court visits. So consider also dispute resolution clauses that incorporate alternative dispute resolution and allow for a third-party neutral to help you navigate through that dispute. And you may see it in the case of COVID-19, you may see people rallying together, co-employees rallying together to challenge an employer on an issue. So it's very useful if you have a dispute resolution mechanism that allows you to ventilate that dispute without necessarily having to go to court. We've already seen a few cases going to court, and I'm sure we'll talk about it shortly. But these, I want to call them class actions in court, but where co-employees come together to work, to push an agenda against an employer, which in their view is justified, and it may very well be justified, but the courts will never give you the opportunity that alternative dispute resolution gives you, which is to ventilate those issues and understand where somebody is coming from, because the courts will look at the paper documentation. And by the way, yesterday it became mandatory for us to file our cases online only. Ooh. So if all if all, how that will work. Yes. So if all you're presenting is documents will you be able to say, the reason we had to implement this pay cut, for example, was because our shareholders were unable to infuse new capital into the company? There's some things you will never be able to ventilate in court.
Yes.
So let's consider how we then embed some of these alternative measures into our dispute resolution processes, also in the workplace. So force majeure, yes, you can have it, but if you don't have it, it's not fatal. Dispute resolution, please consider having it as a clause going forward. And then work from home, I see it as an inevitable addition to our laws going forward.
Okay, thank you. There's a question for you, Jackie, from Jennifer Nyakenya. Back to basically leadership. What are your thoughts about the directive, where did it go, to reopen schools in Tanzania and the government's general approach to tackling the pandemic? Any lessons our leaders can draw from?
Naomba niseme ya kwamba mimi si Mtanzania, but initially I asked myself, Jennifer, does President John Pombe Magufuli know something that the rest of the world does not know? Because his approach to COVID was, it does not exist, and if it exists, it's not affecting us. But then I engaged with a few Tanzanian professionals. And what I discovered is that actually on the ground, a lot of the measures that we have seen, for example, here in Kenya, are in place. So for example, the physical distancing, the sanitizing, the masks and all that, they actually are on the ground in place. So what do I think about the directive on returning to school? I think as any government has been faced with, the government of Tanzania, the United Republic of Tanzania, is certainly faced with the challenge of balancing lives and livelihoods. And I'm not sure to what extent the healthcare system was prepared for a pandemic such as this. So for them, probably rather than publishing numbers every so often and saying these are the numbers and then not being seen to be doing anything about those numbers, maybe that's why they took the position that they did in terms of, I don't see it and therefore it doesn't exist. Having said that, I would be interested in seeing what draft of measures they have in terms of what the health and safety of these children and their teachers and the administrative staff will look like when they have to go back to school. I'm still curious as to the approach that has been taken, but I feel that it is largely driven by the resources that were available to the government and the way they felt they could respond responsibly or otherwise to the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. There was a question, I think you had already answered this question about the legislation where the tests, mandatory tests, is anchored. You had already answered this question. Raimond, an anonymous participant wants you to touch on the issue of elderly workforce and their return to work.
Okay,
scenario.
thank you. Yeah, thank you for that brief question. Yes, that actually has been touched on by His Excellency the President in the very, very initial communications, mostly for public servants. He said, when you are 58 years and above, please work from home or take leave if your work can't be able to allow you to work from home. So that directive has been given. And also on 29th of June, the directive from the Ministry of Labor also emphasizes the same, where it says employers are supposed to put in measures. Now it has moved from 58 to 60. I don't know why. So the directive is any worker who is 60 years and above, although for most, actually government workers are supposed to retire at 60. So I don't know why that's 60. And also many, like 95% of private companies are also, the maximum retirement age is 60, unless now you are in other categories, you are a lecturer, you are a judge or the likes. But I've pushed that age to 60. And then now what they're adding is, other than the age, they say the age and then the other vulnerable groups, because there are people who have some conditions, either diabetic respiratory complications, which have been ongoing, blood pressure, and the likes. So what they're saying is employer needs to put in place measures to ensure that that category of employees are again supported. So the support, just like the president said, is basically on two issues. So one is work from home, or then can they be on leave as they wait for the curve to flatten and the numbers to start going down so they can be able to resume operations, because they're the most vulnerable, the aged, and then now the people with the existing conditions. So those are category of staff will not allow to actually come to offices because it's not just an issue of coming to the office. There's a lot of exposure even before people get to office, or even as people leave the office. Because yes, your office, you may have done everything wonderful, but you have to walk out, you have to go through the lift, and then you have to walk in the streets, and maybe you have to go for lunch. So there are so many measures. So within your office, you might have complied, but outside, there's still exposure. So there's a guideline in that you look at the president's guideline, and then now the latest rules from the Minister of Labor, they're actually addressing that. So all employers, you just need to be alive to that fact that yes, and to take it further, if an employee comes to you and makes a special request that, hey, I have an underlying condition that I need special arrangement, or I need to have some additional controls put in place, as employers, you need to be able to consider and be able to ensure within your capability to be able to make those arrangements. Because if there's a provision which has been given for such complaints to be reported if the employer doesn't address them properly. And also, just to stretch it a little bit further, there's an issue of liability on employers. If a staff contracts COVID-19 within your workplace, and it's actually found out that you failed to comply with the protocols that have been put in place, it's actually a liability, and there'll be consequences, because in those guidelines, they're saying yes, employers are responsible to put this in place, and also be able to periodically report to the Minister of Labor. So as we move forward, very soon it will actually now either find itself in an act, and even before the act, any regulation which comes from the ministry, it actually has the full force of law. So we just need to ensure that yes, COVID-19, if it's contracted at the workplace, and it can be proved that yes, the employer was at fault, or you relaxed in one way or the other, then you'll be held liable. And then now it becomes an occupational disease. And just to, in the Work Injury Benefits Act, for a work injury or an ailment or disease which has been contracted at work, the law and the Work Injury Benefits Act actually allows for you to remain with that staff for up to 12 months. You have to pay salary, and you have to ensure that, yes, you have insurance in place to be able to reimburse you for that 1 year. You can only make a decision either to disengage on retirement on medical grounds or otherwise after 12 months. So somebody may have some condition, COVID comes in and it complicates some issues, but if it's found out that it was actually contracted at work, and more so this person was elderly, or he had a prevailing condition, and you as the employer, you never listened to the plea, then you are in for it, and it's for a very long time, not just for the 14 days or for the 1 month. Thank you.
Okay, as you're answering that question, Raimond, there was a question also by Lawrence Ngugi. So both you and Jackie can take this. I think part of it has been answered in your response in terms of an employer's liability. Yes. And the extent of it, should an employee contract COVID in the course of employment. But there's a second link to this question as to whether that liability extends to contacts of the employee.
Okay. Yes. Now, you have a contract, and the contract of employment doesn't extend to your husband, your wife, your children. actually a personal, because employment contracts are normally personal contracts. So it's just the company and the employee, or you as the employer and your house girl. It doesn't extend to, although in your house you may be two employers, the husband and the wife, you are all employers of the house girl.
Yes.
So now, being personal, if that worker contracts an ailment at the workplace, it can now be extended to the other contacts, because he'll be in a matatu, infect other people, he'll get home, there are people who will be infected. So that compensation, that chain will not extend to that level. It will just be the employee claiming that, yes, the employer was negligent, they violated 1, 2, 3 protocols which are put in place. I contracted these at the workplace, and I need to be compensated in addition to some fines being paid by the employer. Although key concern again is how to prove. Because yes, you contract COVID, but how sure are we that you contracted it at the workplace? That's now the other challenge with COVID. Because even if your colleague tests positive, and then now you go test, you test positive, how do you prove that actually the two of you, or one has, or actually it's you who infected your colleague, or it's your colleague who infected you? Because you may not even be sure who was the first victim to actually infect the others. So there'll be those questions, and I know at some point these cases will actually get to court, where people will be trying to extend this liability, saying, yes, I was at work, I contracted COVID, and I incurred 1, 2, 3, 4. So can the employer compensate me? So it will play out, but for me, we go back to the employment contract, which is personal, so it won't extend very far the way it's being asked. Yeah, so it will remain the employer and the employee, either the two persons, but it can't extend to family members and the other extensions.
Thank you. Jackie, do you have anything you'd like to add?
In addition to what Raimond has said, it would be within whatever scope of medical cover you have. So if your employee medical scheme is such that it covers the employee and his family, then that is certainly a situation that is within your control. But like I said earlier, we need to start having these conversations around claiming under the existing medical insurance policies that we have.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So we have a question from Ronald Kimani before we move into the very hot area of redundancies and pay cuts. Can employees refuse to report to the workplace if, in all fairness, the employer has not met the requirements of providing a safe working environment? For example, those who handle multiple clients, but there are no safeguards to prevent exposure, e.g. screens, adequate social distancing, dealing with human waste without proper tools, etc.
The short answer is yes. And the reason for that answer is that it is the employer's responsibility to create a safe working environment. And if they are not, then they are actually in contravention of the law. So to that extent, if the employee's reason for not attending the workplace is that the employer has not provided a safe working environment, please make sure it is documented so that it is not held against you later that you are away without leave or you are otherwise absent from the workplace. But it should be documented to the extent that a third party has noticed that the reason for your not attending the workplace was because the employer did not provide a safe working environment.
Thank you. There is a question here, a long question from Violin Nguti. I think you had answered part of this question when you talked about this being the time to review the employment contracts. So her question relates to COVID having caused organizations to think of putting in place flexi and shift working. But she says the challenge comes in where working hours are already clearly defined in the employees' letters of appointment, and employers then find themselves in a situation where having employees work away from stipulated working hours likely attracts claims such as overtime. And so she poses the question, what can employers do? I believe you had tackled this question when you talked about this being a time for us now to renegotiate the employment contracts or review the employment contracts.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
it's true. And also just Helen, to just add, there was an tripartite agreement between the Minister of Labour, FKE, and KOTU, which was addressing areas around existing contracts, including collective bargaining agreements, where employers are actually executed with the unions. So that tripartite agreement, out of the clauses that were agreed upon was renegotiation of the existing CBAs, because you may have a CBA where every year there'll be a 6% increase, but COVID has come in, revenues are going negative, so will you be able to afford the 6%? Even if we had signed and actually recorded that agreement in court, it's actually a court order. So they opened up that window saying, yes, let parties go back to the drawing table and be able to renegotiate. So key for leaders, employers, it's how you approach it, because all of us, in one way or another, we have either family member, ourselves, we've been affected by COVID. Either somebody is on unpaid leave, somebody has been retrenched, somebody is not sure what's going to happen tomorrow. So it's a time where I don't think there'll be employees who will be very difficult if you communicate and be able to address them on the reason as to why these signed contracts, signed covenants have to be revisited and have to be reevaluated. Again, the issue will be, are you doing it permanently? Are you doing it for some period? Because some leaders have taken it and actually moved to make them permanent. So there'll be resistance. But if, in your communication, you can be able to come and clearly illustrate that, yes, it's a stopgap measure to be able to address this situation that we are in, then it will be picked up by staff and you'll actually be able to have revised contracts for this period, so that when the period is over and things are back to normal, then you can resume the normal contract that the employees had here. So it's just an issue of communicating and engaging. So the challenge is, let's not be in a hurry, and also let's not just be doing emails, doing memos, and not talking and engaging. And engaging doesn't mean you have to have a one-on-one physical meeting. These virtual platforms are still good enough to be able to explain and have your staff be able to understand what you're going through, the plans that you have, and why you're taking the measures that you are taking.
Okay. So you are basically reiterating what Jackie said earlier about communication. Communication, it is key. We must communicate and communicate well and effectively. Now we have like 26 minutes left, and I thought we should use this time to get into that hot potato of redundancies and overdrawn leave. This concept of advance leave, you know, if you can tackle the issue of advance leave, or what people are calling overdrawn leave. There's a question from Ines. I think I should ask this question about whether an employer can retain part of an employee's final dues in the wake of redundancy to clear or pay part of the loan obligation of the employee a few months in advance without their prior consent or discussions. Yeah, so while we are talking about redundancy, we've seen in the media how certain organizations have handled employees, in terms of declaring them redundant, and how what Jackie talked about earlier, a class suit in quotes, how employees have gone to court challenging pay cuts, and how in the end this has come to can bite the employees because they end up not only losing the job, but also not getting their final dues in full. They are staggered. The payments are staggered. So very, very, very delicate balancing act there. You see where both the employer and employee need to conduct themselves in a certain way. So I just want to, the two of you to share your thoughts on redundancy in the wake of COVID-19, and how as leaders we can perhaps be more empathetic and more in tune, with what Jackie was referring to earlier, with the situation the way it is and how to handle it better.
Okay, I can go first. So for me, and looking around the situation, the way it has evolved since the first case was reported in Kenya, the key aspect is redundancy should actually be the very last resort for any organization, any employer. The very, very last resort when everything else has failed. Because even for people where there is no work at all, you still have the organization, and ultimately you still want to get back to business. And before COVID, you had one of the very competent team, very competent and skilled resources. So if you run to redundancy, it's an issue of, yes, you're actually losing your key resources, mostly to competitors. We'll actually look around to be able to look at, yes, who has been released and who has been best performing. So that's key. You lose your staff in that even as we start reopening, you will not be able to be in a position to get them back because the competitors are actually out looking. And in every disaster, we have strategies. So my strategy will be, yes, let me use this disaster to be able to make myself strong. Part of making myself strong is, can I go and look for resources out there and get them at a cheaper price? So for people who have been declared redundant, they are very easily, they're available. You can actually be able to get them at a cheaper price. Somebody was being paid 1 million. You can actually be able to get them currently at 500,000 because there is redundancy, and then now the whole global world is down. So no one is employing. So there are people who are just looking for these excellent workers who are in the market there, but now they're being released by their company. So that's one aspect, that you'll be losing your competent people, and you don't know when, because it may be September, October, things are up and running, and you start regretting as to why you disengaged with your very able people. So that's one thing, in that when you're looking at redundancy, you need to look at that. Second, redundancy is not easy. It's a very expensive venture, because actually the law says when you declare people redundant, you need to finish up with them. You should not retain their cash or actually enter into arrangement as to paying them by installments, unless you can prove to the court that the reason for the redundancy is that everything is negative. You have no cash at all. Then the court can actually be able to allow you to pay it by installments, but within, again, very short period. You can't stagger the payments within 1 year. You need to pay them within a shorter period. So there's an issue of cost attached to it. And then just the process. Redundancy, again, it's not just by word that, yes, we are declaring people redundant. It's an area that is highly guided by law. When you look at the Employment Act, the process is very detailed as to how you do the redundancy. So as I said, COVID has not suspended that particular provision of Section 40 of the Employment Act on redundancy. So that section has to be complied with. You need to have a reason, which is a valid reason, and you need to follow through that process. So for me, yes, you can go ahead, but please do it as the very last resort. What I'll advise is have conversations with your teams, and the best route when you can't actually be able to move, like the hotel industry, you can actually be able to send your workers on unpaid leave. You still have an attachment with the staff, in that, on unpaid leave, the staff is still under you. So you've not disengaged. You just told the staff, hey, things are down, I can't be able to pay you. However, when things improve, we'll be able to come back. So unpaid leave or adjusted pay, depending on how you can actually be able to, your affordability, how you can be able to afford to, can you pay 50%, 75%, or 20%? And then I'll keep your staff on unpaid leave as you wait for the situation to improve, for them to come back. So you have to look at all those motions. And then ultimately, because if you send people on unpaid leave, when the situation improves, you bring them back. They're still your staff. You don't lose. However, if the situation is bad and you have to either disengage with all of them or some substantial portion of them, still you'll have the redundancy route available for you. So don't rush into redundancy. It's actually the last resort. You can still do away with adjusted pay, or even live without pay if the situation is that bad, as you monitor the situation. Because as we said, you're already down, you can only go up. So you need to weigh and be able to say, yes, when we start building, you need to build with a team that you know, other than laying off people. And then now you start building from scratch with people that actually you never engaged, you have no history with. It becomes very difficult even for you to revive. You lose your customers. Your staff had done a lot of wonders with your customers, but now you let them go. You get new teams who have no clue as to what your strategy was, how you are getting those customers. So it will be very difficult to release staff, and a substantial portion of staff, when you're actually expecting to recover and be able to come back, unless you have a different strategy. Because there are some companies which have now decided to go fully digital, and then now you look at your resources currently, you realize, hey, they don't have the capability. Then yes, you can go the redundancy route, which I said it has a cost, but still you will incur other costs on now getting the resources which can be able to drive your new strategy going forward. Because as you said, as a business person, as a leader, you should not be held by the past. Look at the situation and look at the opportunities. In that, yes, the opportunities within this COVID to be able to drive your business to a next level, and that next level may require different skill set from what you have. So if you're doing that, having that in mind is okay. But if you're just doing redundancies as a way of just trying to manage the situation without a clear strategy, then it may actually be able to kill your business, and you may not be able to revive at all. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So the question by Ngus about whether I can withhold, someone's final dues on account of redundancy for them to pay back a loan. Do I need to consult that employee? Is that even legal?
Now, on loan issues, there are two angles. There are bank loans or microfinance loans. So for that one, I know if it is a loan and the employer has an arrangement with the financier, what happens is when the staff is getting a loan, there's an agreement which is signed. Part of the agreement will say all the final dues will be channeled to that account to be able to settle any outstanding liabilities before now the financial institution can be able now to follow up with the staff who has left. So if there's that agreement, it's actually lawful, and it's okay, because the employer has that contract which you signed as an individual, committing that actually instructing the employer to be able to forward your terminal dues, and redundancy dues are actually terminal dues to the financial institution. So if there's an agreement, it's okay. Now, if it's a loan advanced by the company, yes, I know it's not just given over the table. You also have to commit and sign an agreement committing that, yes, there's a loan I've received from the company, and at the point when I'm exiting, it's a liability the company will able to recover from me. However, there's a rider there in that the Employment Act actually prohibits employers from advancing cash to staff. The law only allows you to be able to advance loans or advance some cash to staff to the extent of 2 months' salary. Anything above 2 months, then now you can't recover from the final dues as an employer. So if you had advanced the staff some cash which was over and above 2 months' salary, then whatever you're doing is an illegality, in that the loan or the agreement ought to have been less than 2 months, 2 months pay, then now you can be able to recover that from the final dues, including any other liabilities, because staff might have owed you 1 or 2 issues. So that one is still lawful, in that, yes, the law provides, and actually the Employment Act spells out what deductions an employer can be able to make from an employee's pay. But anything outside that, then it becomes an illegality. So withholding, that one is no. There must be an agreement to actually authorize the employer to be able to withhold. Then also the other situation where an employer may just feel you've declared people redundant, but now you want to spread it out. It's still not right. And also basing on the reasons, because COVID is either side. It's affecting staff, it's affecting the business. So even the businesses, when they're undertaking the redundancy, they also should be a bit cautious as to how long they also need to be able to pay.
Thank you. Jackie?
Okay, I note we're running out of time. So in addition to what we already said about employment contracts, I think the other area of benefits that maybe we haven't touched on, and we should, is pensions and maybe any other statutory deductions. So to the extent that you are considering pay cuts, you must also consider the effect that they will have on the statutory deductions and on benefits such as pensions. And you will also be guided by the regulation around those industries, especially pensions, and if it's an administered scheme, for example, the scheme rules and any other sort of regulations around those areas. So not to forget that and not to put it aside. It's something you have to think through when you're considering pay cuts. Now, on the question of pay cuts, of course, currently we can't talk about that without thinking about the Media Max case. So in that case, I feel that unless maybe what was reported was underreported, it was a very unfortunate series of events where an employer perhaps genuinely decides we need to take pay cuts across the board so that we can continue to survive beyond the foreseeable future. Then unfortunately, employees band together and take the matter to court. What then comes out of that proceeding is a decision, a consent ruling, which essentially said redundancy can continue, but no pay cuts. Now, if redundancy can continue, it means you can be terminated. You don't even have a salary on which to now consider the pay cuts that have been denied by the courts. So this is why I keep saying we need to have a very level-headed conversations right now, because both from the employer perspective and the employee perspective, there are constraints on resources. So we have to look at it from both sides, whether you're sitting in a boardroom as a board that's considering what decisions you need to take, or whether you are sitting as the union or the employees and deciding this is not a fair administrative action. So I would summarize that by saying, if it is the law, comply. If it is a discretion, then exercise it fairly, so that there is no challenge to whatever decision you have made as an employer. By April 2020 statistics, the ILO had suggested that 2.7 billion or 80% of the global workforce had been affected in one way or another by shutdown. So if employers are doing all they can to make sure that their entities continue to exist, then we as employees also have to play our part in terms of ensuring that we're working with them, even as they try to work with us. And I agree with Raimond that redundancies, and we need to go back and look at the definition. Even the English definition forgets the legal definition of what redundancy is. It means that thing, that role is no longer required. So for me, in the Fairmont case, when a hotel declares everybody redundant, I cannot understand, because that means, excuse me, you no longer need a front office staff, you no longer need a chef, you no longer need a food and beverage manager, for example. So what happens when you're finally back on your legs? You cannot legally start to hire those positions because you declared them redundant.
Redundant.
So even as we make some of these decisions, we need to be guided by the law, and we need to exercise whatever discretion we have as fairly as possible. That's all I want to say on that.
Yeah, so there was a question by Judith about Judith Oduge Otieno. And I'm asking that as a segue into, what you've just said about how do you declare someone redundant, and then when we assume some semblance of normalcy, you advertise for those positions again, okay? So the question here is, really, she wants us to discuss in a very short time, future options for rehiring for companies that have been forced to declare redundancies to survive on skeleton staff, and that may wish not to completely burn bridges with their skilled staff in whose training they had invested heavily.
Okay, thank you. I'll be able to give you, it's actually a case which was in the media, so it's not something very confidential. The case of East African Portland's Cement, because the company was having financial difficulties. So a decision was made to look at the costs. So part of the costs were on the payroll. So what the company decided is we declare everybody redundant. So the strategy was, after the redundancy, then we'll rehire, but on different terms because of our financial position. So it ended up in court. I know there was some agreement, but I know that process may still be going on. So that's a valid process in that you've been constrained because of finances, and you're looking around. Yes, you can't be able to sustain the current workforce at their pay. So redundancy comes in to be able to clear all the liabilities, and then now it's free for anyone who wants to come in at new terms, but you must pay off completely everything that you owe the staff up to that point now when they're transitioning with the new contracts. So even without COVID, some companies were working around that, but mostly on managing costs and being constrained because of revenue shortfalls. Now, with COVID, it can actually still play out in that, yes, you had staff who were earning very high salaries, and also the number, as you said, skeleton staff. So you may actually declare everybody redundant, now focusing on, you still need the roles, but you need the roles at a rate that you can be able to afford, and you also need to reduce on the numbers, because you may find in a department we are 10, but when you reopen you need 2 or 3. So yes, it's a business decision you can be able to take, do redundancies, and then now be able to look at yes, who are coming and the numbers that are coming in and at what pay. So that will still be legal if you completely pay off and finish that redundancy process completely, because redundancy, it means that person is no longer your employee. So if they come back again, it's actually new terms, new conditions, and then now you can be able to survive as a business. So that's a strategy that some businesses are taking on, because it's true, even when businesses will reopen, it won't be back to where we were in February or back to where we were in December. You have again to just start slow. And the reality is you may not afford all the staff, and you may not afford the pay that they were at. So even as you get into redundancy, that's why the law actually now allows for conversation, in that even before you do that redundancy, can you have a conversation with staff where now they get to understand the reason as to why you have to declare them redundant, and the reason as to why you will need some of them, but at reduced cost or even reduced benefits, because it may not be salary alone. All other benefits some benefits actually may be withdrawn completely, or even some other benefits that they were enjoying, the threshold may come down. So it's a business decision that needs to be taken, but it needs to be taken while complying with the law, in that the closure ought to comply fully with the law. Then now when you're bringing them back again, you do proper contracts so that you don't get into trouble. When somebody now has come in the new contracts 5 years down the line, then now they are still referring to the original contract. Then now you get into a mess when you haven't done it well. So even as we insist on conversation, documentation is key, in that all that document trail to be well kept, well worked on, so that you don't miss out on some things and then they backfire when now somebody's living in 2025 or 2030. Thank you.
Now, when you talked about fresh agreements, so when we are discussing pay cuts, do we need to get into fresh agreements with the employees?
I know Jackie will agree with me that it's not a new contract. It's just an addendum to what you have, because it's just it's temporary, and what staff needs to understand, and also this I'll insist again to business leaders, please don't make it permanent. It should be something temporary as you look at how the situation is playing out, but don't make it permanent. Use COVID, and then now when things are working well in 2021, 2022, 2023, then now you think, hey, COVID really came in and helped me to save a lot. So let it be actually temporary, and it's just an addendum to the main contract that you have.
Thank you. Jackie?
That's agreed.
Thank you. Okay, we have 4 minutes left. Any burning questions here? I think we've answered most of the questions that were put across. There was a question from Anne about Raimond guiding on performance appraisal, I believe, for employees working from home. And somebody else wanted more clarification on the advanced leave days, whether they are a liability that the employer can deduct.
Okay, yeah, just being spot on the 2 questions. Yeah, I had touched on the appraisal, but just to reemphasize is that work is still on. Your targets are still the same. It's just that we are refining to be able to be more definite in that, yes, you're working from home, but this is the deliverable. So just refine on the deliverables, but still appraise your staff, because you're still paying them and they are working and producing. So the appraisal process should not be stopped because people are working from home. Actually, going forward, COVID has actually just been a blessing, so that many companies can actually be able to put in policies for flexi working from home, and then now policies as to how you'll appraise and be able to monitor the performance of staff. So please go ahead. Don't wait for people to resume. Then now you resume our normal appraisal. And then again, the other thing is, let's go digital so that we forget about the physical appraisals. Let's all do it online. It will be a great deal. The other question was on, just remind me, then I pick it up on.
The other question, goodness, what was the other question?
It was about advanced leave and whether
that's... Yes, advanced leave. Yes. Advanced leave.
Again, COVID has come in to just ensure that, yes, we clear all our leave days, because some of us have been having huge leave days. So please ensure that even as leaders, because, you know, we talk of leave focusing on staff, but even ourselves, head of departments, CEOs, please ensure that after COVID, you don't come back to the office and you have 20 leave days, 30 leave days. Yeah, that's not good leadership. So let's also clear our leave days. Then now, advanced leave, yes, it's also another softer way to address the COVID situation, in that there are these staff who are working from home, or those who can actually completely not be able to do anything, like drivers. Because, you know, you have a driver, the driver can only work when they're in the office and running, but now the driver cannot be able to be said he's working from home or she's working from home. So for them, they can actually be on paid leave. So they're on leave, it's paid. They clear all their leave days for 2020. In fact, even start earning. They actually start getting into leave for 2021. It's perfectly in order. When they come back, they have that liability to be able to pay. So they'll come work without going on leave. So it will be either an emergency situation. It's a good way to address it, because the key thing is these people are at home. The case of a driver, they're at home, not working at all, but you're paying them. So instead of sending them on unpaid leave, telling them you are not working, I'm sending you on unpaid leave, you agree with them, say, yes, I'll continue paying your salary, but you're actually on leave. So when you come back, you have like, you owe me 40 leave days. So you'll be able to work for 1 year or for the next 2 years. So you'll only go on leave when it's absolutely necessary. But such employees will still appreciate that, yes, the employer was gracious enough. I was not working for 5 months, but I was being paid. So it's a balance as to, it's purely legal. Just the same way, like you work, you've not gone on leave, then you resign today, the employer is expected to pay for all the leave that you've accrued and you've not proceeded. So in this same situation, it's now the employee owing the employer. And if those employees leave before they can actually be able to pay off those leave days, it's subject to deduction from their terminal dues. Yeah.
Or really, even when you declare them redundant, you would still deduct the advanced leave?
It's a liability,
okay.
But it can only be negotiated, or the employer, if you want to maintain your employer brand, then now you...
Yes, Jackie talked about, empathy in the very beginning.
Yes. Legally, yes, but now employer brand and looking at it ethically, some of those things now you forgot them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Jackie, would you like to add anything?
In relation to that, no.
Okay. All right, we've come to the end of the webinar. I want to thank our panelists. This has been an exciting conversation. Obviously, it's not the end of the conversation. We'll continue having these conversations. I also want to thank our panelists and our participants. We were streaming live on Facebook. I think we'll get the statistics on the participation online. But today's webinar recorded an attendance of 69 participants out of the 122 who had registered. So from me and the USIU-Africa team, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. We hope to see you all again for some more riveting conversations on matters governance, legal, and HR. Indeed, we have been given a snapshot of what it means to lead in unprecedented times, such as the one we are living in now. So thank you, everybody. We will share a recorded version of this webinar with all those who participated today. Thank you.